Jeff Bezos, one of the richest men in the world, is no stranger to exclusivity. But what happens when the billionaire himself is denied service? That's exactly what occurred when a high-end restaurant refused to serve him. Unaware of who he was, or perhaps simply unimpressed by his wealth. Rather than causing a scene or demanding special treatment, Bezos left without a word. However, what happened next stunned everyone. The very next day, he returned, not as a customer seeking a meal, but as the new owner of the establishment. This shocking turn of events left staff and patrons in disbelief. But why did the restaurant refuse to serve him in the first place? And what led Bezos to make such a bold move overnight? Let's dive into the full story. The day before his surprising return, Jeff Bezos had walked into the elegant restaurant, dressed in his usual casual attire. It was the kind of place where reservations were booked weeks in advance. And the clientele consisted of the city's elite. The maitre d' barely spared him a glance before shaking his head. "I'm sorry, sir, but we are fully booked tonight," the man said curtly, his eyes scanning Bezos up and down, as if evaluating whether he belonged there. Bezos nodded, unfazed. "I don't mind waiting," he replied, his tone calm, but the maitre d' remained firm. "We have no availability. Please try another restaurant." Bezos could tell the rejection wasn't just about seating availability. Perhaps they mistook him for an ordinary businessman who wasn't dressed the part. Or perhaps they simply didn't think he was the kind of guest they wanted. Either way, he didn't argue. With a small, knowing smile, he turned and walked out. That night, as the restaurant continued serving its wealthy guests, none of the staff had any idea that their refusal had set something in motion. Bezos, with his characteristic decisiveness, had already made a phone call. By morning, the paperwork was in progress. The restaurant's owner, an aging businessman looking to retire, had been contemplating offers for months. When Bezos' team reached out with an irresistible deal, one far beyond what any other bidder had proposed, the decision was swift. By noon, Jeff Bezos legally owned the very restaurant that had turned him away. And that evening, he walked through its doors again, this time with a different purpose. As he stepped inside, the maitre d' from the night before immediately recognized him. His face went pale. "Good evening," Bezos greeted with a slight smile. "Do you have a table for me now?" The maitre d' stammered, his usual air of arrogance replaced by sheer panic. He had spent years perfecting the art of judging customers at first glance, deciding who was worthy of a seat and who was not. But now, standing before him was the man he had dismissed the night before, the man who, as of that morning, owned everything in the restaurant, including his job. Bezos watched the maitre d' struggle for words, but he wasn't interested in making a scene. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the restaurant's floor manager, who had rushed over after hearing the commotion. "I'd like to speak to the staff," Bezos said, his tone calm but firm. Within minutes, the entire team, chefs, servers, kitchen staff, and management, gathered in the dining area, whispering among themselves. The news had spread quickly. Some employees were excited, others nervous. A few, like the maitre d', were visibly shaken. Bezos took a step forward, hands in his pockets, surveying the room before speaking. "I don't hold grudges," he began, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant. "But I do believe in opportunities. And I believe in change." The maitre d' swallowed hard. "This restaurant has built its reputation on exclusivity," Bezos continued, "and while there's nothing wrong with that, exclusivity should never come at the cost of respect. Every person who walks through these doors should be treated with dignity, whether they're wearing a $1,000 suit or jeans and a t-shirt." Murmurs rippled through the staff. Some nodded in agreement, while others avoided eye contact. Bezos then turned to the maitre d'. "As for you," he said, pausing just long enough to let the tension build, "I'd like to offer you an opportunity as well." The maitre d's breath hitched. He was certain he was about to be fired on the spot. Instead, Bezos smiled. "You have a choice," he continued. "You can stay, but under a new policy, one where every guest is treated with equal respect. Or you can leave and find a place that still operates the way you prefer." The maitre d' hesitated, his mind racing. He had spent years working his way up in the fine dining world, and this restaurant was his pride. But in just 24 hours, everything had changed. Finally, after a long pause, he nodded. "I'd like to stay," he said quietly. Bezos nodded back. "Good," he said. Then, glancing around the restaurant, he added, "Because starting today, we're building something better." A soft ripple of applause broke out among the staff. The tension in the air shifted, some still wary, others intrigued. One thing was clear: the restaurant would never be the same again. But Bezos wasn't finished yet. He had one more surprise up his sleeve. Bezos raised a hand, signaling for silence. The staff fell quiet once more, waiting for him to speak. His eyes scanned the room, as if he were already planning the next chapter of the restaurant's story. "I've made a few changes," Bezos began, his tone still calm but now laced with authority. "Starting today, the restaurant will be offering something new, a completely revamped menu. A focus on inclusivity, and a commitment to sustainability." A murmur of disbelief ran through the room. The seasoned chefs exchanged confused glances. Bezos wasn't the typical investor they'd encountered before. They had expected him to make an appearance, perhaps to collect his earnings and quietly step away, but this was different. "Of course," Bezos continued, "there will be challenges, but with the right leadership, I'm confident this place can be even more successful than before." The manager, who had been standing in the back, stepped forward hesitantly. "What about the concept we've been working with for years? The exclusivity, the fine dining experience?" Bezos raised an eyebrow. "What if I told you that fine dining doesn't have to mean exclusion? What if we could offer the best food and service without making people feel like they don't belong here?" The manager blinked, stunned. This wasn't the future he had imagined for the restaurant. He had always believed that exclusivity was the heart of its success. But Bezos was challenging that belief, pushing boundaries in a way that made him think twice about his assumptions. "But exclusivity is what keeps the reputation intact," the manager muttered, clearly still caught in old traditions. Bezos chuckled softly. "Reputation can be built on more than just exclusivity. It can be built on integrity, quality, and treating people the way they deserve to be treated. We'll focus on crafting an experience that anyone, whether they're a billionaire or a regular customer, can enjoy and appreciate." The staff remained quiet, processing his words. Bezos had given them a glimpse of a future that was uncertain but filled with possibility. It was clear that he wasn't just interested in owning the restaurant, he was interested in transforming it. At that moment, a young server, who had been listening intently, raised her hand. "And the customers?" she asked. "How will they respond to these changes?" Bezos smiled. "That's the part where you come in. You're the ones who will make this vision a reality. The customers will follow your lead." The staff exchanged looks. They had always prided themselves on being a part of something exclusive, something that set them apart from the rest. But now, they were faced with a challenge. Would they embrace this new vision, or resist it? Before they could answer, Bezos turned to leave the room. "I'll give you time to think. But tomorrow, I expect a plan for how we move forward. Let's make this restaurant the place where everyone feels welcome." As Bezos stepped out, the team was left to grapple with the future of a restaurant that had just been turned upside down. The next day, when Bezos returned, he found the staff gathered, ready to present their ideas. But what they didn't know was that Bezos was just getting started, and the changes he had planned would go far beyond the menu and service. The following morning, the restaurant staff had gathered early, their nervous energy palpable. They huddled in the staff room, eagerly waiting to present their ideas for the new direction that Bezos had outlined. They weren't just reshaping a menu, they were being asked to reimagine the entire identity of the establishment. Bezos entered the room promptly, his presence commanding. He looked around at the employees, who were seated with papers in hand and a mixture of excitement and anxiety in their eyes. "Good morning," he said, his tone casual but authoritative. "I'm eager to see what you've come up with." The floor manager stood first, nervously adjusting his tie. "We've come up with a few ideas," he said, flipping through the notes. "We've considered focusing on local, sustainable ingredients, and revamping our wine list to appeal to a broader range of guests. We also want to introduce more affordable options to create a balance between luxury and accessibility." Bezos nodded, impressed by the thoughtfulness behind the proposal. But he wasn't done yet. "What else?" he asked. "What's your vision for the restaurant that goes beyond just the food?" The room fell silent. No one had expected that question. The floor manager shifted uneasily, his words faltering. "Well, We want to make sure our service reflects the values we're aiming for. We've thought about training the staff to be more engaging, less rigid, but we weren't sure how far to go with it." Bezos smiled, sensing their hesitation. "Don't hold back. It's about transforming everything. The experience, the atmosphere, the people you bring in. If you want to make this a place where everyone feels welcome, you have to get comfortable with being open-minded." A quiet murmur of agreement swept through the room, but it was clear that some of the older staff members were still unsure. They had built their careers around the concept of exclusivity, the idea that certain people were simply worthy of fine dining, while others were not. Then, from the back of the room, a young sous chef named Emma spoke up. "What if we turned this place into a community hub? Not just a restaurant, but a place for people to connect over good food. Maybe we could host events, cooking classes, or even collaborate with local artists and musicians to make it more of a cultural experience." The room fell quiet once more. Emma's idea was bold, and completely different from anything they had done before. It didn't just break from tradition, it sought to obliterate it. Bezos turned to her, his eyes gleaming with interest. "I love that idea. A restaurant that's not just about eating, but about engaging with the community, where food becomes a bridge between people from all walks of life." "Tell me more." Emma smiled, encouraged by his response. "Well, we could start by offering free cooking classes once a week for families in the area. We could bring in local musicians to play on certain nights. Maybe even host a pop-up market with local artisans and farmers." The floor manager, who had been skeptical, now looked thoughtful. "That's an interesting angle. We could still offer a high-end dining experience, but we could also incorporate these events into the space. It could attract a wider range of people and build a sense of loyalty to the restaurant." Bezos nodded, clearly excited by the potential. "Exactly. This restaurant can be more than just a place to eat, it can be a destination. A place where people feel like they belong, regardless of their background or their bank account." Just then, the maitre d', who had been so nervous the day before, spoke up. "What about the way we treat our guests? I mean, how do we make sure that everyone feels equally valued, regardless of their appearance or status?" Bezos turned to him, his smile genuine. "It's about building a culture of respect. If we lead by example, the rest will follow. I want every guest who walks through those doors to feel like they are the most important person in the room. It starts with each of you, and how you make them feel." The room was quiet as everyone reflected on his words. What had started as a challenge to the restaurant's identity was quickly becoming a movement toward a completely new kind of dining experience. Bezos paused before continuing. "Now, we're not just rebranding, we're creating a legacy. And that starts with the people in this room. I'm counting on all of you to make it happen. Let's show the world that fine dining can be something entirely different, something that welcomes everyone." With that, the staff looked at each other, feeling a newfound sense of purpose. They had come to work for a restaurant that was known for its exclusivity. But they were now on the verge of helping create something entirely new, something that would make a real impact on the community and the industry. Bezos turned to leave, his mission clear. "I'll be checking in tomorrow. And we'll start implementing these ideas right away. The world is ready for a change." As he walked out, the staff exchanged excited glances, ready to rise to the challenge. They knew that this wouldn't be easy. But with Bezos' leadership and their shared vision, they were about to transform not just a restaurant, but an entire way of thinking about food, hospitality, and inclusivity. But little did they know, the biggest challenge was still ahead. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and intense work as Bezos' vision began to take shape. The staff, once divided by their comfort and exclusivity, now came together with a shared purpose. The chefs experimented with new dishes that blended luxury with accessibility, while the servers worked on refining their customer service approach to be more warm and personal, rather than distant and formal. The restaurant began to transform from the inside out. The dining room was rearranged to create a more inviting atmosphere, with open seating to promote interaction between guests. New, vibrant artwork lined the walls, showcasing local artists. The private, exclusive rooms were removed to make space for communal tables where people from all walks of life could dine together. But as the days passed and the changes became more apparent, the restaurant's regular high-profile clientele began to take notice. Many of them had been drawn to the restaurant's exclusivity, enjoying the privacy it offered and the aura of prestige that came with being a part of an elite circle. And it didn't take long for the first challenge to arise. On a particularly busy evening, a well-known celebrity arrived, flanked by a group of friends. The maitre d', who had just completed the new training on inclusivity, approached the group with a friendly smile. "Good evening, welcome, we're so happy to have you here tonight." The celebrity glanced at him, clearly annoyed. "Do you know who I am?" The maitre d' hesitated for just a second before responding. "Yes, of course, but here, we treat every guest with the same respect and warmth, regardless of who they are. You're no exception to that." The celebrity's face darkened, clearly displeased. "I've been coming here for years, and I'm used to being treated a certain way. Do you think I'll just sit at some communal table with regular people? That's not what I signed up for." The maitre d' maintained his composure, remembering the training he'd received. "I understand, but the concept of the restaurant has changed. We're now a place where everyone is equal, regardless of status. We have a wide variety of seating options, and you'll have the choice of where you'd like to sit." The celebrity huffed but begrudgingly accepted the new arrangement. However, as the evening progressed, it was clear that some of the other high-profile guests were also struggling with the new atmosphere. Some seemed uncomfortable in the more relaxed setting, and others outright complained about the shift in service. Bezos was made aware of the growing tension among the restaurant's former regulars. The changes were exciting for some, but for others, they felt like a betrayal of everything they had enjoyed about the restaurant's exclusive reputation. That night, as Bezos sat in his office overlooking the bustling restaurant, he pondered the challenge before him. He had wanted to create a space where people could come together. But the transition wasn't going to be easy. The following day, he gathered the staff again. The energy was different this time. There was a certain unease in the air. Bezos knew it was time for another conversation. "I've heard that some of our guests aren't adjusting well to the changes," he said, his tone more serious than usual. "And I understand that. This is a big shift. And it's not going to be embraced by everyone right away." He paused, allowing the staff to digest his words. "But that doesn't mean we've made a mistake. We're trying to redefine what luxury means. We want to create an experience that isn't about status or elitism but about hospitality, warmth, and the feeling that everyone is welcome. And yes, that means we'll lose some guests in the process." A murmur of agreement passed through the room. "But," Bezos continued, "what we gain in return is far more important. We'll build loyalty not on exclusivity, but on a shared experience. People who value inclusivity will appreciate what we're doing, and those who can't adapt will eventually move on. And that's okay." A staff member raised her hand. "What if we lose too many customers? What if the concept doesn't work?" Bezos gave a reassuring smile. "We're not trying to please everyone, but we're creating something that's sustainable in a way that exclusivity can't be. People are craving experiences that make them feel like they belong, not just like they're a part of an elite few." The room went silent for a moment as the staff absorbed his words. Finally, the sous chef, Emma, spoke up again. "We're not just making food here, we're making a statement. A place that connects people through food and experience. And that's something special." Bezos nodded, pleased by her insight. "Exactly. We're about creating something that lasts. Something that resonates with people long after they've left the restaurant." But just as the conversation seemed to be turning toward a more optimistic tone, the door opened, and a figure entered, an influential restaurant critic who had written some of the most scathing reviews of the place in the past. Her eyes locked onto Bezos. "I hear you've made some big changes," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm here to see if they're worth writing about." The challenge was clear. The restaurant's new identity would now be tested under the scrutiny of the one thing Bezos hadn't anticipated: a review from someone who could either make or break the new chapter they were writing. And so, the real test was about to begin. The critic, a well-known food writer with a reputation for brutal honesty, sat down at one of the newly established communal tables. The atmosphere had shifted from uneasy to tense as everyone in the room knew who she was and what she represented. This was the moment when Bezos' vision would truly be tested. The staff, including the maitre d' and the chefs, were on high alert. They had been working tirelessly to embrace the changes. But now, it felt like everything was riding on this one night. Would the critic see the value in what they were building? Or would she write it off as a misguided attempt at reinventing a classic? Bezos, ever calm, watched from the back, observing every detail. He had taken a risk, one that could have easily led to failure. But he wasn't interested in playing it safe. He wanted to create something meaningful. Something that would leave a lasting impact on the industry. The critic ordered a variety of dishes, sampling everything the kitchen had to offer. She paid close attention to the flavors, the presentation, and the overall atmosphere. As the night progressed, Bezos noticed that her demeanor didn't reveal much. She was focused, serious, taking mental notes, but there was no obvious sign of approval or disapproval. But then, as the meal came to a close, the critic stood up and approached Bezos directly. "Well," she said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "I'll admit, I wasn't expecting this." Bezos raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You've managed to take a concept that was built on exclusion and turn it into something that feels more human." She continued, "The food, yes, is as exquisite as ever. But the experience, the way the staff treats every guest, the way the space feels open and welcoming, that's what's truly remarkable." The critic paused, almost as if she were still processing the changes herself. "I wasn't sure it would work. But you've created a place where people of all walks of life can feel like they belong. And that, Mr. Bezos, is something new. Something that the industry needs." Bezos didn't smile immediately, but his eyes softened. "Thank you," he said simply, not needing further validation. He knew that the success of the restaurant was no longer just about the food or the service. It was about creating a space that reflected his values of inclusivity, community, and sustainability. The critic nodded and left, leaving the staff to reflect on what had just transpired. The following week, the review was published, and it was everything Bezos had hoped for, and more. The critic wrote with admiration about the restaurant's transformation, praising its commitment to inclusivity and its ability to blend luxury with accessibility. The new concept was a hit, drawing in a new wave of customers who were eager to experience something fresh and innovative. But the true success came not from the review itself, but from the shift in mindset that had taken root within the restaurant. The staff, once focused on catering only to the elite, had learned to treat every guest with the same level of care and respect. They had embraced a new philosophy, one that centered on creating genuine connections. And it had paid off. The restaurant became more than just a place to eat. It became a symbol of change in an industry that had long valued exclusivity over equality. And as for Jeff Bezos, he had done what few thought possible. He had taken a restaurant that was teetering on the edge of tradition and reinvented it for the future. It wasn't just a win for him, it was a win for everyone who walked through those doors, no matter who they were. And in the end, that was the legacy he had always wanted to create.